Thank you very much, colleagues of the Tribunal, and thanks for all your patience. I'll now sum up and give you the concluding recommendations of the Tribunal. Just let me make, I'd just like to preface those conclusions with a few comments of my own, if you'll just bear with me. Our worthy defence lawyer did his best to make the case that what is happening to the Great Barrier Reef is lawful and, if you like, ordinary. And perhaps if he had called an expert witness, we might have heard from a member of the business community who perhaps would have argued that surely the Great Barrier Reef is very large and can we not compromise a bit here in the interest of all getting along and conventional economic development. And we heard in the defence that this conventional economic development argument, is very important to Australian society. However, we really must ask ourselves, where do we draw the line? Well, we were told by legal experts, and I think we all know this, it's common knowledge, that the Great Barrier Reef is listed on the World Heritage. And if for an area to be listed on the World Heritage, it's considered to have outstanding universal value against certain criteria. Well, that's the line. When a place is listed on the World Heritage, a line is drawn. It has outstanding universal value, and in fact all parties to the Convention have a legal obligation to help protect and maintain the integrity of that outstanding universal value, not only in their own territories, but in all other territories where World Heritage is listed. So World Heritage areas are, if you like, no-go areas for industrial development, and its outstanding universal value can't be offset, can't be regrown, can't be recreated. It simply exists naturally, if you like. We also heard evidence about the poor and inadequate environmental governance and regulatory frameworks, and we've heard some comment about that. But I would like to acknowledge the defence's argument that a black letter reading of national law as it exists does both explicitly and implicitly enable the industrial and related developments that we've also heard from our scientific experts are harming and threatening the ecological integrity of the Great Barrier Reef. And in that context, the individuals and the companies involved are, in that sense, acting lawfully. However, I'd like to quote a good friend of mine, Dr. Nicole Rogers, who has written that matters may be lawful, but awfully so. And this is what she calls the awfulness of lawfulness. So the awfulness of lawfulness is manifested when law is strictly applied in a moral vacuum with complete disregard for social and policy considerations. Actually, if Nicole was here, she'd be telling me she was citing another legal academic whose name I've forgotten who came up with the phrase, the awfulness of lawfulness. But nonetheless, I'm quoting her in this case. But this definition, I think, of legal awfulness can be extended to include when law is strictly applied with complete disregard for ecological considerations, including the well-being of the community of life and Earth, our home, as a whole. And Noel has mentioned the Earth Charter, and I think this sense of universal responsibility is very well captured in the preamble to the Earth Charter, which says to realise these aspirations, we must decide to live with a sense of universal responsibility, identifying ourselves with the whole Earth community as well as our local communities. We are at once citizens of different nations and of one world in which the local and global are linked. Everyone shares responsibility for the present and future well-being of the human family and the larger living world. The spirit of human solidarity and kinship with all life is strengthened when we live with reverence for the mystery of our being, gratitude for the gift of life, and humility regarding the human place in nature. So this tribunal is concerned with the substance of the issue, not the black letter of the law. The substance being the long-term well-being of the Great Barrier Reef as a globally unique and by any measure, or all measures, extraordinary phenomenon and expression of life on Earth. So we cannot let the limitations of law as it is currently distract us from this concern. Therefore, our tribunal concludes the following. we find that the evidence is sufficient to support the conclusion that the Great Barrier Reef is being harmed by avoidable human impacts which are interacting synergistically with climate change. We conclude that the Great Barrier Reef is suffering grave harm, is undergoing threats, and in the absence of strong intervention, its long-term ecological integrity and its outstanding universal value is at risk. Secondly, we accept the evidence we heard that if we choose to intervene where we can, this will help ecosystem resilience and help the Great Barrier Reef to persist, and that ensuring such intervening actions is a responsibility of the Queensland and Australian governments. We also heard that there is current law that could be used more effectively than what it is. There are World Heritage obligations that would seem to be not being met, and there are state and federal environmental laws which could be more strongly made use of, but their powers appear to be laying dormant relative to the need. We can use these, and we can ensure that our mitigation responses, i.e. how we deal with the impacts of climate change and taking account of cumulative effects, are based on the best available science, and that the measures that are deployed are evidence-based. However, it's clear that given the overwhelming impacts from the ongoing growth in the current modes of production and consumption, that's a phrase from the UN system, modes of production and consumption, a new ethical and legal framing whereby human well-being is contingent on a healthy planet and a thriving community of life is necessary if we are to protect in the long term large natural living phenomena such as the Great Barrier Reef. What Noel referred to as an ecocentric ethic is needed and needs to be given legal expression, and we have such an expression in the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, a civil society charter which is being put forward for consideration by governments. It's been noted that we have under many different texts and treaty obligations and under many different ethical framings, we must have regard for future generations and intergenerational equity. We have an obligation to hand on to future generations the Great Barrier Reef in as good, if not better, condition than what we found. And given that it had been degraded by 100 years or so of human land use, the obligation is actually to hand it over in a better condition. We've also heard that we have obligations regarding our Indigenous communities and local communities. Australia signed on to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Community impacts are being ignored, and so one of our recommendations is that a further regional tribunal be held in Queensland, perhaps based in Cairns rather than Brisbane, and the participants of that are the traditional custodians of the Great Barrier Reef and associated country who are directly implicated in all of this. We'd also like to recommend that there's a further regional tribunal held with youth to further consider future generation and intergenerational equity issues. Certainly, we've also heard about the synergistic impacts of climate change, and it is a unholy, complex mess, or let me call it an entanglement. You know, we've got these impacts on the reef from human-forced climate change, from burning fossil fuel, and further impacts on the reef from mining fossil fuel, so that it can be burned and cause more emissions. It's what's the opposite of a virtuous circle? It's a vicious circle. It is truly a vicious circle. So clearly, Australia meeting our obligations under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change would put us on a sustainable energy pathway, which would have a number of co-benefits. It would help reduce the direct impact of climate change on the Great Barrier Reef and the synergistic effects with water pollution and other threatening processes, and it would further reduce the need for further industrial development on the case and all the impacts that flow from that. And it would also deal with some of the economic impacts that the defence raised about about suddenly shutting down the use of fossil fuel for energy and the negative impact that would have on our economy. Because the idea is that you have sustainable energy pathways and we transit over a matter of decades. No one's suggesting we do this tomorrow by breakfast, even though I wouldn't stop people if they wanted to. In terms of the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, there are clearly many articles that are being transgressed, and certain specified rights of nature in the UDRME are clearly being reached, including three which sit under Article 1. 1A, the right to exist, is clearly under threat. Let's not forget the Great Barrier Reef is an ecosystem, and an ecosystem is actually the result of the interaction between communities of populations of species and their surrounding physical environment, but they surround and change the physical environment. And we heard how life itself forms the basic infrastructure of the coral reef, which is the coral, and the coral itself is under threat. So, absolutely, right 1A, the right to exist, is under threat. Also, right 1C, the right to regenerate for an ecosystem to regenerate its biocapacity and continue its vital cycles and processes free from human disruption. And these vital cycles and processes include natural processes that enable these ecosystems to change through time in response to pressures and adapt and evolve. And they are clearly being disrupted. And also 1D, the right to maintain its identity and integrity as a distinct, self-regulating and interrelated being. And I understand if the pollution continues, we risk flipping the system from being a coral-based system to an algal-based system, and clearly its identity and integrity is threatened. And I think we've heard very strong evidence of this. So we recommend, in conclusion, that all of our conclusions be drawn to the attention of the International Tribunal for the Rights of Mother Earth. So with that, I thank our tribunal, I thank our defence and prosecuting lawyers, I thank our expert witnesses, I thank the members of the public for witnessing tonight's events, and with that I declare the tribunal formally closed. Ask you to join me in a round of thanks to all those who presented tonight, and after we do that I'll hand back to Michelle for some post-tribunal directions.